I'd like to introduce our speaker, who's Beth Styler-Berry. She's the director of the river restoration aspect of the Nature Conservancy here in New Jersey. She's a former executive director of the Musconetcong watershed and has been managing and dealing with issues here regarding rivers and waters for at least the last 20-some years. So with that, I will let her then speak about the issues that have to do with dams and dam removals here in New Jersey.
So as mentioned, I work for the Nature Conservancy, but I also have very deep roots in the Musconetcong, and I am on their board of trustees. I'm also a lifetime member of the Musconetcong Watershed Association. All right, I'm going to start with a very basic question, which is, what is a dam? We think we know when we see it, and what we consider a dam might be slightly different than so let me see if I can move some of this stuff around so you folks don't have your view blocked. Is that gonna be?
I think you can minimize the time.
Okay. All right, thanks. Okay. All right, so according to the state of New Jersey, a dam is anything constructed within a river of any material that holds back water to a depth of 5 feet or more. So that's what the state considers a dam. If it's less than 5 feet, it's not regulated by the state, it's not counted or monitored by the state, but it is not any less obstructive to things like fish migration, aquatic wildlife, paddlers, things like that. But it's just not regulated until it hits 5 feet. And dams have been created for a bunch of different reasons throughout history. People have been building dams for 5,000 years. Very early on, it was was pretty logical. We need this water to stay here. Let's stop it from going past. So water supply, flood control, which I'll mention in a second, hydropower, recreation, and navigation. Folks have been using dams for those purposes, at least some of them, for 5,000 years all around the world. And I'll point out now, and you'll notice throughout the presentation, there are all sorts of different kinds of dams. You see right there, 2 very different dams. When it comes to flood control, which people assume that a dam is put there to control flooding. Very often when we go to remove a dam, that is the first concern. Oh my gosh, now we're going to flood. Only 6% of the dams in the state of New Jersey act as flood control dams. And you can tell when you see a dam like the one in the lower right there, that is a flood control dam. If you can stand on top of a dam and your feet do not get wet, that dam is there to hold back water. If, like in the upper dam, you stand on that and your feet get wet, that is not a flood control dam. Because whether or not that dam is there, if 10 million gallons of water would typically pass that spot in the river, it's going to continue to pass that spot in the river. And that is 94% of all dams in the state of New Jersey are not performing flood control. And you can tell just by looking at them. This is just to give you kind of a quick glimpse of the worldwide dam and, more importantly, river situation. On this graphic, it's basically showing the longer rivers in the world and which ones remain free flowing. The red spots are places that are currently free flowing, but on which hydropower and therefore large dams are planned. This one, the darker the color, so the darker reds and darker blues, that just indicates a very long river, a river of 1,000 kilometers or more. And the bright blue are the ones that are free flowing. The green are considered well connected, but not free flowing. And then the red ones are where rivers are disconnected. So you'll notice a few things there, which is, for North America. And you'll also notice that you can think of this almost as, hey, where are humans on this earth, right? Because where there are humans, there are dammed rivers. The places that you're not seeing dammed rivers are lower population. Zeroing in a little bit more on the United States. This is a time progression of where dams and reservoirs were found. And again, you can think of this as how did the colonization move across this continent, right? You can see it moving from the 1850s through 2000. And yes, those are all dams, but they are not all of the dams. These are the dams that are in what's called the National Inventory of Dams, or the NID. And a dam doesn't make it into the NID unless it's 25 feet or more. And I can guarantee you, you've seen very few of those dams. 25 feet or more, or 6 feet and holding back a tremendous amount of water, right? I don't have the number at the top of my head. It has to be a massive dam to be in the NID. And you're only looking at National Inventory of Dams in this picture. So here is the United States with the dams categorized for their hazard class. A high hazard dam is a dam which, if it fails, will put human life at risk. That's, every dam, every regulated dam has a hazard classification. A high hazard, risk of loss of life, a significant hazard, no risk of loss of life, but risk of infrastructure. Like it's going to wash out a bridge, it's going to take out, power lines and sewer lines, things like that. And then the yellow are low hazard dams, meaning neither of the above will happen. It might be a little bit messy downstream, no loss of life, and no major infrastructure loss. I'm going to show you a very cool interactive website on the NID, that National Inventory of Dams. And here you have the criteria for them. What puts you into those 91,000 dams? There are probably 1 million or more dams in the United States. Only 91,000 are in the National Inventory of Dams. There are states, I think it's one left, Alabama, that doesn't even have a dam safety bureau in its state. So there is a very wide range of how these things are regulated. So this is an interactive website. This is the National Inventory of Dams. So you can zero in on your town, your county, your state, your vacation home, and you can see what's upstream with respect to those inventory of dams. A lot of times people will ask, as somebody who is conservation minded, why do you want the dam out? That's the potential for green power, right? I'll say something else about green power in a minute, but very few of the dams that are out there can generate anywhere near modern, the amount of power needed in a modern home or town. It is in general, these are the dams on that one map that was pretty much coast to coast. These are the dams that are currently not powered, but could generate greater than 1 megawatt of power, right? So it's not like, let's just put hydropower on all those dams and solve our power problem without fossil fuels. But it is actually a tiny fraction of the dams that would be able to generate hydropower. Also, the impoundment, the water behind the dam, because it is filled with silt and usually like decaying plant matter, etc., actually generates greenhouse gases. And the more they study it, the more greenhouse gases, including methane, which is the worst of the greenhouse gases. Different types of dams. This is a bigger problem the closer you get to the equator, where water temps are higher. But actually, the more common type of dam, a smaller dam that has more silt behind it, right, where silt is never being passed through, then you have that as an increase. I will also say it's not green by any definition. Number one, it is not free of emissions. Number two, a green power source is one that does not negatively affect the environment. And by installing a dam, you are integrating, man-made materials into the ecosystem and disconnecting a river. So that cannot be classed as not having a negative effect on the environment. Okay, so here's that big coast to coast with its hazard class. Oh, sorry, I meant to just go back. And there's the potential, the dams with potential to power. You can see tiny fraction there. So this map, this is the happier map. This is the map of dams that have been removed in the last 100 or so years. There have been 1,800 dams removed on purpose, right? These are not the dams that have taken themselves out. These are dams that have been the result of an effort on behalf of people to remove dams. And you can see again, the effort is coast to coast and the effort is increasing. Some of the recent federal legislation for infrastructure includes money specifically for dam removal, totaling about $800 million. Why? Because the average dam is built with a life expectancy of 50 years. The average dam in the United States is 57 years old. Some of them are 100 or more years old. So they are aging infrastructure that, the Nature Conservancy or the Musconetcong Watershed Association comes into this field with an environmental lens on dam removal, right? We're looking at improvements to the ecosystem, but this money is saying this is a lot of failing infrastructure that puts a lot of people and infrastructure at risk. Let's take it out. There is, of course, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Yeah, they're concerned about passing fish as well. But when you get, to the Army Corps and FEMA, they're not so much, right? The language is in there. When you make a grant application to them, they're going to ask you what is the ecological benefit, but they're not generally in the business of making sure fish can travel upstream, right? So this is an issue that cuts on a lot of different ways. It's also a public safety hazard. There are deaths around dams all the time. And in a lot of states, including the state of New Jersey, when these dams go out of service, they very often get put into open space. Like, the state buys 1,000 acres, and on that 1,000 acres is an old dam. Well, you're now inviting people to recreate near dams. And there are dam drownings. New Jersey does not track dams, dam-related deaths. Pennsylvania does, and they've had 200 in the last 40 years, dam-related drownings. So it's a little hard to say where we would be because we're not tracking them. Again, going back to what these uses are, you can see that water supply for residential or farming, yes, there are still some in use for that. There are, New York State uses a lot of surface water. In New Jersey, we're using less and less surface water, more and more groundwater. After 9/11, there were a lot of restrictions put on the security measures around using reservoirs for drinking water. And Hackettstown is a good example. They had 2 reservoirs that they retired. They said, we cannot, surveil them 24 hours. We cannot light them. We cannot put 6-foot fences around them. We just can't do it. We're going to sink 2 more wells. And they actually tried to put those into open space. And the state said, nope, we don't want the dams. So they actually had to sell it for like $1 to someone, who bought that private property and is now trying to get rid of the dams. Yes.
Just go back to, you mentioned drownings caused by dams. That's people drowning in the water complicated? Or what
Both.
causes the death?
Okay, I'm gonna repeat that question for the folks on Zoom, which is when we say a dam-related drowning, what exactly does that mean? Upstream, downstream? It actually means both. It's very often a kayaker who gets over the dam and gets caught up in the hydraulic roller on the other side of the dam and cannot get out. But in New Jersey, you can Google them and you can put them together one by one, the drowning deaths. It's not tracked by the state. But on the Raritan River, there have been, the family was playing upstream of a dam. One kid went over, was drowning, a sibling went in, sibling drowned as well. So it is not a great condition, whether you are an angler, a boater, or just in there for recreation and swimming. So it's a kind of a mix, very often kayakers. Okay, so flood control, we already said how few are actually used for flood control anymore. Hydropower, when these were built, they were powering mills that, ground wheat or sharpened knives or things like that, right? It is no longer practical to power a factory in general. I'm not talking about the mega dams, but the dams that are on the South Branch, the North Branch, the Raritan, the Musconetcong, right? Those dams and those mills cannot meet modern power. So power needs. So very often it's abandoned, but the dam stays in place, right? The use is gone, the dam stays in place. Recreation, good example, Lake Hopatcong. Was that the original purpose? No, the original purpose was to have a whole bunch of water so it could be sent over to the Morris Canal and make sure the canal stayed water. But recreation gradually grew around the lake. So is Lake Hopatcong Dam coming out? It is not. It's still meeting its major use, which is recreation. Usually when you see most lakes, you're looking at, there's a dam there making that lake, right? But in general, if it's settled, if it's part of a lake community, the owner is the one who makes the decision to remove a dam. Except in extraordinary circumstances, I've never seen one. The state doesn't make a person take it out. They might make it lower the water level. And, the conservationists can't make a person take a dam out. But when they want it out, we can step in. When they don't want it out, if it's part of a lake community, the dam is going to stay. So it's not like someone else can make an owner take a dam out. Navigation, that's, referring to the earlier use for canals, keeping the canals filled with water. And not only in earlier use, but on the Snake River dams, it is still being used to water a canal that's moving freight up and down. So when the Snake River dams come out, they will have to replace that transportation with another method. Okay, obsolete dams, as I said, these are dams in place. Again, I'll just point out big variety of dams that we see, right? So, you kind of know when you see them, but it's a little hard to describe one. They can be cut stone, they can be concrete, they can be timber, they can be metal. But what usually happens is the use goes away, but the dam stays in place, having the continued impact on the aquatic ecosystem. So the risk to humans for dams staying in place is that unmaintained dams are always at a risk of failure. This is the two dams in Michigan that failed in 2020. An upper dam failed and sent a huge slug of water and mud downstream, which then caused the failure of another downstream dam. These dams have been in terrible repair. The owner said, we don't have enough money to repair them. And within about a half an hour, they were both gone. These did have lake communities around each dam who said, hey, put the water back. But the owner said, nope, we're not going to do that. It's very easy to find, made big news. Another dam that made big news was the Oroville Dam down out in California, 700 feet tall. It's the tallest dam in the United States. And it began to fail during one of those mega California rainstorms. First, the river started to cut around it and then cut down. and they had to evacuate tens of thousands of people. The liability for recreational use for the existing owner, right? So those, there were a couple of drownings on a dam on the Musconetcon. That was in the ownership of a private homeowner, that dam. Impact on fisheries as a food source. In New Jersey, there are probably not a lot of people who are, you know, fishing to, you know, kind of subsistence feed their family, right? But recreational fishing, fish migration, you know, the ecosystem that fish need, not only migratory fish, but, you know, what we call resident fish, fish that don't migrate, they still need to move around. They need to move to their spawning grounds, their feeding grounds. They need to go where they need to be when it's 90 degrees outside, and they need to be able to move into tributaries when the water, you know, when it's flooding after a major storm event. So even though they don't migrate, they still need to be able to move around. And safety risks to things like infrastructure and development in the event of a dam failure, even if life is not lost, it can, you know, be detrimental to infrastructure. So dams block fish migration up and downstream, and it also changes the ecosystem, the ability to get back and forth from side to side. You know, like 1,000 years ago, bank to bank was probably 50 feet across on this little river, right? So it changed the entire, separated those two ecosystems. It reduces water quality by increasing temperature and decreasing dissolved oxygen. That seasonal flow regime, that's a trigger for things like spawning and mating. So now we don't have that anymore, right? We don't have high water, low water. We just have this kind of water. Nutrient movement downstream, and can't really see what that says. Lack of sediment, right? A river moves sediment all the time. It's kind of what a river does for a living, is it moves sediment. You know, you learned back in 4th or 5th grade in social studies, you know, the river deltas, after the best farming is, that's because the river's constantly moving sediment. If you have a dam in the river, that sediment isn't going anywhere. It just backs up behind the dam. It can be 5 feet, 10 feet, 50 feet deep. A big mud, like mucky kind of mess where it should have been a rocky bottom flowing stream. Oh, I know why I touched the screen. Yeah.
When you remove a dam, then what happens? So if we got a lot of mucky sitting out, I'm going to assume a lot of that washes out. Has it ever cleared back to being able to be a rocky stream, or and what does it do to the downstream communities?
Okay, so the question was, if we have a lot of sediment in behind the stream, what happens when we remove the dam? What happens to the sediment, and does the river kind of heal itself or return to its previous rocky bottom state? So the answer is, depending on how much sediment is there, and you know, one of the first steps in a dam removal is to make sure that there's no contaminants in that sediment, right? That's a whole different ballgame. You're not going to release, you know, contaminated sediment to a clean downstream. To be honest, in rivers in New Jersey, what we do is say, is it more contaminated upstream than downstream? Because if they're the same, it doesn't matter, right? But yes, eventually, and in a pretty short order, the river will look close to its native state with respect to sediment covering the bottom. About 50% of the sediment will move through in about 2 weeks. There's actually some scientific papers on this. And the other 50% will take up to 2 years to move through, depending on weather. You know, if you get a lot of really good storms, it's going to go a little faster. When we remove a dam, we take a close look, not only at the chemistry, is it contaminated, but we look at the physical characteristics. Is it all really fine material that's going to just move through in a bunch of turbidity? Is it a lot of sandy or, you know, rocky sediment? And that, you know, should have been transported downstream, and it's just going to fill in a downstream area that has been deprived of that sediment for 100 years. So it takes a while to get its balance back, but it does get its balance back. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in a little bit. Okay, so just a kind of a listing of, I think, what we've already pretty much touched on. What exactly are the benefits to a human community with a dam removal? So now, just grab my water. We kind of looked at dams around the world and dams across the United States, but these are the regulated dams in the state of New Jersey. That means that they're 5 feet or higher, right? So this is not counting any of the small dams. Regulated dams, there are 1,700. There are probably another 1,000 that are unregulated. On the right, you're seeing them prioritize not for hazards like the other maps that we looked at, but for the ecological gain of their removal. How much will this change the ecosystem if we remove it? So the red is the highest prioritization, highest value of removal, and then moving down, to yellow and then to green. So you'll notice that a lot of the red is around the 2 coasts of New Jersey, right? New Jersey has 2 coasts, the saltwater and the freshwater. And that is because a big gain comes from reintroducing fish migration. So that's why those tend to have the higher priorities. And once you remove the ones closest, say, to the Delaware River, then that high priority just shifts to the next dam upstream, right? Because you've moved it from the mouth, and we'll look at a couple of examples. And then that priority is to do the next one and the next one and the next one. I just wanted to take a moment after looking at all the dams in the state of New Jersey is to introduce, there's a New Jersey statewide dam removal partnership. The website is njdams.org. And there's a bunch of information on there, technical information, case studies, so you could see before and afters. What do the regulations look like? What are the ecological benefits? How do we monitor those benefits? njdams.org, and sometimes there's information sessions that are free and online that you can join. So just wanted to point that out as a resource. And again, this is the statewide dam removal partnership. We have one group of people, which is most of us actually, that try to prioritize the dams that are high priority ecologically, but also where do we think we can pull together the money, a willing owner, and then the regulators to get this dam out. They become the highest of priorities. And we talk about monitoring, policy, outreach to the public, and also funding sources. That's just a screenshot of the homepage for the njdams.org site. And again, you can see all sorts of resources there, everything from what is a dam, purpose of dams, vocabulary, some videos. We try to keep some news stories fresh on there of dams, usually with a New Jersey focus, if not like a kind of a universal focus. Okay, so the case studies that I'm about to show you are all in the Delaware watershed. So this is just, that shaded area is the Delaware watershed in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. And I'm just going to talk for a little bit about the Musconetcong watershed. All of these squares that you see are locations of dams. The green ones are dams that were removed. The red ones are existing. And the kind of orange ones are listed here as fully or partially breached. That means a person didn't want to take them out, but over time, they will come apart on their own. So it's a lot better for the environment and for everything else if we make a plan and carefully take it out. right? In a way that we can control that sediment, that we can control, downstream, that we can monitor them before and after. These are dams, the orange ones that kind of took themselves out over time, right? So the dams that I'm going to show you are closer to the confluence with the Delaware. And again, that would make them high priority because that will reintroduce the migration of American shad. It'll improve the migration of eels, right? Another migratory fish that needs to get upstream. Unlike shad, an eel can go up the face of a dam. A big, strong eel can go up a decent sized dam, but none of the young ones. So when you do monitoring for eels, you might find some big eels upstream, but you won't find any little ones. But when you start taking down dams, you find a better age and size distribution throughout the river, and that's kind of what we're aiming for. So here's just an aerial view of the dams that I pointed out as being closer. There's the Delaware right there. Regalsville Dam, Finesville, Hughesville, and Warren Glens are the ones that I'm about to show you. So they're the first 4 dams on the Musconetcong. And these two, Regalsville and Finesville, there have been dams there for 200 years, 250 years. Some of the oldest dams in this part of the state were in Finesville and Regalsville. So this is the Regalsville Dam. This was the first dam upstream, the first blockage. This is a good sized dam. This wing wall would be, kind of well over my head. If you look at the historic aerials, you see this dam in place kind of, from when they first started doing those flyovers, whatever, in the early 1900s. And then about 1970 to 75, you see this dam start to take itself apart. So everything behind it just gradually moved downstream. The rock, the silt, the trees that might have been caught up behind it, you can just see in the aerials that first it's breached, and then there's a wide breach, then it's gone. And when we took it out, it actually looked like that. So from that big dam, this is actually what was left. But this was enough to stop fish migration. What you're seeing in this sort of on the right side of your screen, a row of what looks like a picket fence almost sticking out, right? That is a timber crib framing of one of the earlier versions of the dam. A lot of time dams get built and then a newer one gets put right on top of it and a newer one gets put on top of that. But that timber crib and these masonry steps were enough to stop fish migration. So we did need to take this dam out. This is the next dam up. This is the Finesville Dam, which looks pretty harmless, right? It's 9 feet high. This was the site of 2 drownings, right? A small dam, you would not think much of it if you glanced at it while you were going across. You can see the old mill across the street there. And a near drowning 2 weeks before it came out. 2 weeks before it came out, big storm, 16-year-old standing at the edge of the river fishing. He fell in. He did get stuck in that hydraulic roller, and living 3 houses away was a Navy SEAL diver who went in and did a rescue dive. I mean, any other time or place, that young person would have been lost. So just kind of a fluke that happened, but this was a killer dam. It was a dangerous dam. This is an aerial of that same dam. Again, a pretty small dam. This is after Irene. This is about 72. This is not high water, but you can see the dam kind of in the center of the screen. Can you kind of pick it out there? Okay. So the river's flowing towards us here, and it's like a cork in a bottle. Because when you have a dam, remember, to be regulated, it has to be at least 5 feet. This was 9 feet. So already the dam is 9 feet higher, the surface elevation, than where it would naturally be. We've raised it up. So it doesn't really have a floodplain anymore. It just, when it overflows its banks out of the, I always call it an impoundment, people call it a mill pond, some people call it a lake. But that is already 9 feet higher than it should have been naturally or would have been, so it's gonna start to spread, right? It's gotta go somewhere. So you're seeing the entire town of, village of Finesville underwater. And in the mill house that I showed you before, that's right in this photo to the left, they actually opened the back doors of the house to allow the river to flow through and do as little damage as possible. Because it was gonna just go through the windows and the doors. So they opened every door and window in the back to let the river flow through. So one of the biggest arguments by the people two drains and a near drain in his ownership. This is what happens when you get storm events. And remember, with climate, our changing climate, we are going to see more intense storms. In the state of New Jersey, it's not predicted that we'll get more total rainfall in a year, but we will get them in shorter, more intense rainfall, right? So anywhere that you have flooding, you are very likely just going to continue to have severe flooding problems. So this is the before. This is the after. And this is standing on the downstream bridge and looking up. So a lot of times people say, you know, when you take out a dam, you're going to leave us with a mud pit. It's going to be awful. It's going to be nothing there but mud, and the mosquitoes are going to come and whatever. This is not even 2 years after the dam is removed. And I brought a potential funder for the dam upstream of this out. We stood on the bridge and the funder said to me, "Where was the dam?" And I thought, wow, there you go. That's like the best thing you could possibly hear. You don't even know where it was, because it, less than 2 years, really looked just like the river it had been for 10,000 years. This is the next dam up. This is the Hughesville Dam. This and the one I'll show you next belong to the paper mill. Very hard-working dam for 100 years. But there's no more paper mill. But still, this is a blockage to fish passage. And you can see when a river is carrying that sediment, right? That's what they do. They carry sediment in a certain equilibrium, right? That's what they're, when a river is flowing and it comes to a dam and slows down, that sediment drops into the impoundment. That's how they get filled up with sediment. But then you have that sediment poor water going over the dam. The river is not going to say, okay, that's how I am now. The river is going to say, I'm supposed to be carrying X pounds of sediment, you know, as I move through per cubic foot, right? Or X grams of sediment per cubic foot. So when a river is starved of sediment, it will immediately try to pick that sediment up to bring itself back into balance. What you're seeing there that looks like a big step at the end of the dam, that's a scour hole, because the river's picking its sediment up. So we see scouring on bridges that are downstream of dams that is more extreme than we would see in a flowing river, because the river is going to scour till it gets its full sediment load back up. Oh, I'm going to show you that dam that I just showed you. I'm going to show you, well, I'll let you see it in its glory there. That's the Hughesville Dam. And I have the time lapse of the removal. So this is a pretty intensive process that you'll see. You know, being someone who is passionate about rivers, like, do I feel happy when I see giant pieces of equipment, you know, crushing around in there? I don't, but I liken it to a root canal. Never wanted to have it done, but if I need to get it done, I want people who are skilled and fast and who will leave me in a position to heal, right? So these are not your average operators in these pieces of equipment. These are people skilled in river restoration. So they're doing their best. You'll see them moving that rock around, which is now kind of running off from, off screen on your right. And they're doing that to focus the flow so that they can capture the sediment in a big kind of a sediment trap that is downstream that they'll continue to clean out. And they'll kind of move that around as needed as the removal progresses. You can see the banks are not full of mud, but of native grasses and eventually trees. So if you were to go down there today, you'll see those, what look like two big kind of piles of rock have now had sediment over them, and some mosses and lichens and things like that. It's a lot more blended in than it looked immediately after. So one dam up from the one that you just saw removed, that was removed in 2016. This is the Warren Mill Dam. This is the largest dam on the Musconetcong. It is 34 feet high. So this is still in place. We hope that it will be removed soon. And those shad that we were trying to bring up from the Delaware River now make it right up to the foot of this dam. And they're waiting there for their chance to move even further upstream. So yes, it works. We definitely, there's the Bloomsbury Dam, if you're familiar with the Bloomsbury Dam. When the Warren Glen comes out, the next dam up will be the Bloomsbury Dam. And there's the Bloomsbury Dam with that same cork in a bottle kind of effect, right? You see the whole town of Bloomsbury underwater there. This dam will be removed by the Army Corps of Engineers because it's happening as part of a congressional action to mitigate the flooding in this town. So it's a little bit of a different approach, not so much for ecological reasons, but for flooding. This is a dam way up on the Muskie by, if you're familiar with the main street through Hackettstown by the cemetery there. There's a little dam in the side. That will be the next one to come out on the Musconetcong. And now, just to do the second case study, this is on the Paulins Hill. If you're familiar with the Blairstown area, this is the third largest. The Musconetcong is the largest tributary to the Delaware. The Paulins Hill is the third largest tributary to the Delaware. So this dam was within 1,000 feet of the Delaware. So immediately blocking off the entire river from fish migration. This was a working hydropower dam, which is very unusual. They had to surrender the FERC license. That's the license that allows them to generate power. This dam was built in the powerhouse in about 1910, and it was doing a very great job of meeting 1910 power needs, which was like 3 light bulbs per house, maybe, no refrigeration, it's just a different world. So now we're blocking off an entire tributary to the Delaware for really substandard power generation. So when the owner had the opportunity to have this removed and take a cash settlement, like equal to a couple of years of revenue, they took that in a heartbeat. It's actually leased, it's owned by the state of New Jersey. So remember I said that the bottom of these streams should be rocky bottom, clear water. This is what the Paulins Hill should look like. This is just about a mile upstream of that dam. You see oxygenation, you see those bubbles on the surface. You see some vegetation in there. There's a couple of leaves. Let's see. There's some leaves in there, some sticks, things that will decompose. And great habitat. everything from sand to cobble. You know, if you've ever been in a stream and turn it over, you'll see, you know, a tremendous amount of life under those rocks, right? That's what the pond scale should look like. That's the native situation in the stream. This is what it did look like behind that dam, right? So there is always pushback to dam removal. It's very natural. It's a gigantic change for people. And people are very attached to their water. And, you know, when people make the case, you know, like I bought the house because it's by this water, or, you know, this is where my grandfather taught me to fish. I don't have to pretend to believe them. I understand what it means to be extraordinarily connected to water because that's how I got here, right? So I understand it's a big, giant change. One of the things that we heard about this was that it was the best fishing spot around. Does it look that way to you? Because when we did the fish surveys, it was remarkably barren of even the least picky fish. They could not even get stocked catfish to reproduce, right? So they were stocking, and fish can survive in this kind of situation, but not thrive. You know, are they going to reproduce? Are their numbers going to be good? Are we going to have a nice diversity? No, it's not going to happen here. So this is what the bottom looks like here. Gotta find my cursor so I can start the video. There we go. So compare this to what it's supposed to look like. There's no great habitat, there's no spawning area, there's no foraging, even the little bit of vegetation that's there has been covered by sediment, right? Totally different world that the native aquatic life would have evolved to live in, right? That this is a whole, who likes this? Canada geese like this, right? Carp like this, that, you know, fish that are not very picky can survive here. So this dam was the biggest dam thus far removed in the state of New Jersey, 304 feet across, 18 feet high. And this is what it looks like now. The dam is gone, the powerhouse is gone. And actually there's about 1,000 trees planted there that are not in this photo. So just want to touch a little bit on how river restoration in general, and certainly dam removal, is a plan to help ecosystems be resilient to climate change. Fish need cold water. You know, if you see a serious angler out there, they're very often carrying a thermometer with them. It's not because fish like cold water, like they're comfortable in it. When temperature goes up, oxygen goes down, 100%. It's a physical thing. You know, it's not something we can change. Temperature comes up, oxygen goes down. So a fish like a trout, and certainly our native brook trout, they cannot breathe when the water gets hot. They are not a fish that likes to come to the surface and breathe. Those fish that do that, you know, the less picky fish, they'll be okay. A fish that needs to breathe through its gills to survive is not going to survive in warm water. They need to be able to access that cool water further upstream in a faster flowing water. So just by reconnecting water, we're giving them access to cooler water, which they will need as our climate changes. They need it also from, you know, those more serious storms that we expect to see. This is that photo that I already showed you, the impounded water behind the Columbia Dam, and what it looks like now. When we removed the Columbia Dam, there were 32 acres of floodplain that were reclaimed. So that water had inundated 32 acres. Now, in the event of a large storm, that river can really spread back into its original floodplain. Number one, that's a benefit. There's also infiltration into that ground, right? So there will be 32 acres worth of rain falling and sinking into the ground rather than adding volume to the river. So that's a quantity issue. But when we can get water to percolate through the ground before it makes its way into groundwater or the stream, we're also improving water quality. We're sending cleaner water to the ground or out to the river. So I'm gonna just kind of skim over this part. These are the steps that we take for dam removal. We don't just go out there. It's not like in the cartoons where you just go out with dynamite and you blow it up. That would be so exciting to see. But unfortunately, there's like 5 years of paperwork before you even like can have a piece of equipment go out there. The paperwork is extraordinarily painful, you know, and it lasts years more than a dam removal does. So we do initial investigations. We go out there and we say, is there a sewer line? Is there a water line, power line, bridges upstream, bridges downstream? You know, we have to look at all of that, take all of that information and make the engineering plan for how we're gonna take this out. We're gonna put, you know, the equipment in on this side or that side. We're gonna go upstream. We're gonna move rock. We need rock. We're gonna lose rock. Then we get a design. We bring that to the regulators who are gonna tell us yes or no. There's a bunch of people at the DEP that regulate dam removal, and they'll have a lot to say about everything from endangered species to the sediment. Where is it gonna go? Where is it gonna wind up? After the regulators get a crack at it, we'll have a final design, and then we'll move to implementation. Usually, a fast dam removal can happen in 4 years. That's fast. Usually you're more like 6 years between, you know, having the owner come on board. Remember, without the owner on board, you have nothing. So none of this happens until the owner says, yes, take it out, right? So from owner agreeing, if you're super fast and it's a small dam, you can probably do it in 4 years. You also have to raise a couple $1 million. I skipped over that part. So the Columbia Dam removal on the Ponce Field that you just saw, all pieces in there together was between $6 and $7 million. The Hughesville Dam was about $1.5 million.
How much of that is actually just the implementation piece?
So
Really small.
the construction part of the Columbia Dam removal was about $5.5 million. So part of that is the dam itself being deconstructed. Again, the easiest part. The harder parts are figuring out. So once you take a dam out, big river, little river, whatever, you take the dam out, the water is going to speed up. You know, it's been stopped for 100 years. It's going to pick back up. But in between, you know, it going in and being stopped for 100 years, there have been every kind of infrastructure put in. 2 bridges upstream, 1 downstream, you know, water outfall from, you know, the Route 80s draining here. All of that stuff has to be protected from the higher velocity that you're now introducing to the site. So on the Columbia Dam removal, we had 2 county bridges, a state bridge, and Route 80 and interstate. So that just handling underneath Interstate 80 alone and making sure the fish could get up there required a bunch of rock going in. That was about $1 million just to get the fish under Route 80 and protect Route 80. You do not want to be known as the people who closed Route 80 for 1.5 years, right? You've got to get that piece right. Okay, so you know, all of these things, other parts of the initial investigation. Then we get deep into the engineering. We need to know, is the sediment clean? How does the water move through this site, right? Because that's going to tell us how we need to protect that infrastructure. Permits and preliminary costs. We have to then raise money. Sorry, there's the sediment again. You wind up with your final engineering and all of your specifications, your technical memo, and then you can bid the job, and you hope that the actual bid is close to what your cost estimate is. And if that happens, then you're moving on to your removal. So I'm gonna ask if folks have questions. If I need to go back and find a picture, I can do that if you have questions about something that I mentioned.
Question. So if it takes so many years to you construct the dam, is it worth it to put in like fish and eel ladders to help the fish move between in and out?
No, so the question is about fish ladders and eel ladders, whether or not they're worth it. Those structures can be pretty good for one or two species. It is not going to reconnect all species back and forth. Every species, this is what cost us $1 million under Route 80. Every species has a different jump height. American shad, notoriously bad jumpers, right? So you have, one fish that it can't be more than 6-inch jump at a time. And this guy can do 10 inches, this one 8, 4, 3. They have different velocities that they can handle. So now we know the dam is out, velocity is going to be this. Oh, now it's too fast for American shad. So we need to slow that down by using more rock. And also every fish, every species has a different, what they call burst length, right? They need to work up to be able to make that jump. So we have to make sure that this is clear enough for them to get up enough speed to make their 6-inch jump, right? And then you have to put all of those things in for all the different species. And you also have to have little pools off to the side so they can rest and get the burst and do the jump and rest. It could take them hours to get through something like that. So with all those things in mind, how can I make a fish ladder that's going to meet all of those fish? They're just going to have different needs. And why do we have to do all that on Route 80? Because humans had incredibly changed the river there, right? If there was no Route 80, we wouldn't have to do that. They could have just gone up like they did for 10,000 years. But when Route 80 went in, it tightened the river. That means the velocity is going to be higher and it's going under a bridge. There's nowhere, like when it gets higher, when the water gets higher and more rain, it can only go faster. It can't spread out at all. So you get like a fire hose thing. So in general, it's not that difficult. You usually have to just say, okay, the worst jumpers are not going to make it here. We'll just accommodate the worst jumpers. But fish ladders, they tend to be kind of species specific. They also need maintenance. They're not free to build. So you have the original cost for building. You have an annual maintenance, right, to make sure there's not logs and sticks and, the railing is broke off. But people have done crazy things to get fish up. Like, have you seen the fish cannon? Yeah, if you haven't seen the fish cannon, go home and Google it. They are putting fish into a cannon and shooting them up over the dam, and they're trucking fish, right? So there's a nonprofit out west that has a slogan, no more fish in trucks. They're like, okay, we're going to draw the line at fish in trucks. But so that's the answer. Fish ladders, and if the dam is absolutely not coming down ever because it is still serving a purpose of flood control, or it's an active hydro that is not going anywhere because it's producing to modern standards, that's where a fish ladder can go. But it is not, to our New Jersey dams or Pennsylvania dams, probably not going to be a good solution. Yes?
I'm curious about convincing owners and towns of dams to be able to take the jump and persuading them that it's in the best interest of their community. When it's aesthetically, they're scared of the changes. Have you ever tried to create an arrangement where an owner, when they decide to sell the land in 10 or 20 years, then they would agree to the dam? Whoever purchases it would have to move the dam or something. Is that like a negotiation device? So this way, even though you can't go to Silver Street Drive, like if you said in the town of Clinton, that they just determined that dam is horrific for the environment, and we all love the dam, just the aesthetics. He said, well, in 100 years, we're going to take it down, and this is what it's going to look like. I don't think there's going to be that much to it. There'll be some, worrying about it, but they'll say, okay, this can get used to it. So they can own it over 100 years, and then they can, get rid of it. Is there approaches that you folks use to negotiate with the owners and towns like that?
Okay, so the question is, how do we negotiate with dam owners when they have an ecologically, critical dam how do we either soften the blow to, to kind of bring them around now, or do we bargain for future removal? In most cases, dam owners are coming to us to relieve themselves of financial and legal liability, right? Because dam safety, once you're on their list, they're not coming off that list. You're gonna be getting letters until you cave. You either have to build it up, which means 5 years from now it gets inspected again, or you can remove it. You mentioned selling a house, like, can we ask an owner whether or not, they can make the next sale contingent on removal of the dam? There is a very good chance the next buyer is gonna say, I'm not taking this with the dam on it. Because up until 5 years ago, 9 out of 10 dam owners that I talked to did not know they owned a dam when they bought a property. They thought it was a waterfall, and it never occurred to them that they actually owned this. But more and more, their attorneys and their realtors are understanding that, and especially in the case of a regulated dam, that it's a structure that is going to need maintenance and is a public safety liability, right? So I think we're going to see more people. I know of a few that I can think of off the top of my head where a person wanted to sell their house and they couldn't do it because the dam was there. So they weren't taking it out for ecological or aesthetic reasons, but they were taking it out because they couldn't get rid of the property. And actually, one of the dams that we're working on in Belvedere, the two owners, very often there's an owner on each side and they own to the middle of the dam. They were both looking forward, in the future to being able to sell that property. And they both know they're not going to be able to do it with the dam in place. So they were like, where do I sign? Because if you work with a nonprofit, we're eligible to bring in a lot of funding that average owner cannot touch, right? So we get the funding and we do the project with their permission, but they can't make an application to NOAA or National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for US Fish. So.
Who owns the Clinton dam? Yeah, I looked at the parent, a couple of years ago, I fixed it up. And also they had the fiasco of the hydrant to fix that. They should have went through that. That should be the new version now, but for some reason they spend millions of dollars on that.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if the decision changed on that in the future, but so the conversation in the room has been, there are some dams, the question was who owns the Clinton Dam? And then that's also the High Bridge Dam, Lake Solitude Dam. Clinton is undoubtedly paying every 5 years to do exactly what you say, repair it, because it has to be kept up to standards. It has to be, if you're a regulated dam, you have to prove your dam is being inspected. The frequency depends on low hazard, medium hazard, high hazard. That's the frequency of your inspection. In a situation like Clinton and another dam that I'm working on now, there is that, the aesthetic piece where people are used to seeing that what they're gonna call a waterfall, but which is 100% not a waterfall. If it was a waterfall, the local ecosystem would have evolved species that are suited to a disconnected river. That's what happens at a waterfall, right? But that dam is disconnecting a river and decreasing water quality upstream and, stopping any fish migration upstream, with robbing river of sediment nutrient downstream. But it is an education, right? Like, so people understand the harm that aesthetic is doing. And then the other thing that I hear on every single dam, because people are not building dams anymore, for obvious reasons. The developing world is building gigantic mega dams, but in our country, we don't build, big new dams. But I totally lost my train of thought. Aesthetics, right? So we can make an aesthetically pleasing replacement, like a set of riffles, so it will look like a natural river. What happens is that people, say this is history, it's significant, right? But I say to them, the history of this river is 12,000 years long. And this little 100 or 150 years that you're looking at right there is a blink in the eye of this river. So if you are really truly, you know, interested in the history, then the history of the river is that of a free flowing river. So, you know, that is something that people need to come around to a little bit more, I think. You can't have the little chunk of history that is most comfortable for you and you think looks nice. I mean, you can have it, but
It's pretty much dead water above the dam. It's kind of like a cesspool of the out, the rooms there, the out.
yeah, so the harmful algal blooms that we are seeing are very often, you know, people will say they're in the lake, right? Lake Capacon, that's a dammed lake, right? Like, I don't call those things lake, I call them impoundments, right? So the impoundment above the Clinton Mill will be subject to those more often as our climate changes. As, you know, we get a couple degrees warmer and, you know, different kinds of storms. So, you know, we will see more harmful algal blooms in New Jersey and across the country. I mean, when I don't know if other people do this, but when I fly in and I'm flying back into New Jersey and I look down in the summer, you can see the algal blooms all over the state. You can just see them everywhere. From the air, they are incredibly noticeable. You know, that robs the lake of oxygen. And so you're putting aquatic life at tremendous pressure by doing that. Not only is it ugly, it smells bad. If the dog drinks it, they'll croak. You're totally, you know, you're really compromising the aquatic life.
What is the rating of the dam?
You know, I don't know off the top of my head, but I can find that out. I can find that out and send that information back to somebody who could get it out. Right? There's actually, the software is online. It's called Northeast Aquatic Connectivity Tool, and you can go in and look at any dam, and you'll see like if the one downstream is a high priority and this one is a medium, you can actually ask the software to pretend that one is gone, and what would your new priority be? Any other questions?
Sorry, what was that? What's it?
Northeast Aquatic Connectivity Tool. Yes,
Can you just touch briefly on, I mean, you're talking before, you know, there's the whole concept of like private property and the public-private partnership, and you know, that seems to be pretty unique, at least in the Northeast in New Jersey, in terms of, you know, private ownerships of dams. How's that look sort of in the rest of the country, right? When you talk about some of the other dam removals, I would imagine some of those are private as well, but how does, you know, I guess the root of the question is, how does private property kind of play into, you know, the whole removal piece?
so in New Jersey, as I said, typically landowners will own to the center of the river. Sometimes they'll own, like in the Finesville Dam, the dam where there were drowning, that owner did own both sides. But if I think what your question is if it's my dam and I want it out, do I have to worry about the people upstream? The answer is no. Case law says the answer is no. It's not your job to maintain that structure for the enjoyment of those upstream. So is that necessarily easy for that owner to do? Not always. But usually, especially when there's flooding involved, the neighbors will kind of come around to that, right? And the Finesville owner, the people in Finesville originally, that, you know, we had 2 additional years of work on Finesville just because of the amount of pushback from the historic preservation folks, right? But when you see your neighbors getting flooded year after year after year, and you're going to say, nope, I like to look out my window and see that lake, you know, then you start to look a little bit like, you know, the not nice person, you know. So you don't really have to keep it in place for anyone else.
What's the timeline for the Warren dam?
So that is a little bit of an unusual situation in that remember how I said people don't know that they own dams a lot of the time? That dam belonged entirely to the Fiber Mart paper mill, the Warren Glen paper mill, that Fiber Mart, and made a couple different changes. The paper mill owned it. At one point, the state of New Jersey bought like 500 acres or something on the other side of the river, to make a wildlife management area for hunting and fishing. What they didn't realize is that they bought about a quarter of the dam went with that property. So now they're in a very unusual situation of being both the regulator and the dam owner. So it makes it a little bit more complicated than working with just the private dam owner, which was the same dam owner on Hughesville, who was like, please take this out right now, take it out tomorrow, and they feel that way about Warren Glen, and the state is, different.
Yeah, and that was kind of the root of my original question is, if the state owns it versus private property, how much quickly, right, can it happen slowly?
So it definitely doesn't speed things up,
Yeah.
because the Columbia project, which was managed by the Nature Conservancy, even though it was owned by the state of New Jersey, and you would think that they would say, thank you very much for taking that giant liability. They were like, did you do this permit, that permit? We want a memorandum of understanding. You have to have $1 million, actually, they wanted $10 million of, liability. They talked about, they didn't make it easy. But that's, that's the lawyer, the challenge. It doesn't make it easier.
Your question in the chat, what is going on in Mountain Valley?
Oh, what's going on at Round Valley is a dam repair. So Round Valley is an active water supply, so that dam won't be going anywhere. It is still used as a reservoir. But it's been lowered so they can do the dam repair. Yes?
You were talking about the silt behind the dam, for them, getting some methane and other greenhouse gases. That silt is gonna go somewhere. It's gonna be broken down by bacteria and form carbon dioxide or methane. So why does it matter where it goes?
So why?
Above the dam or down, it gets in the ocean or in the river water? You're not really accomplishing anything.
Well,
in
if
that regard.
so, the question is, if there are greenhouse gases, including methane, being generated in an impoundment, what's the difference if you just let that water go? So that is in the impoundment, which is warm and warming. So that decay of the organic material in there would not be happening if the river was flowing free. Temperature of the water drops. And you also don't have the future accumulation of that material in behind the dam.
Yes and no. It ultimately gets.
It ultimately goes to the
Sometimes.
ocean, which is the biggest carbon sink on the planet. So it would wind up in the ocean.
But as far as global warming, that doesn't change anything.
It does if it makes its way to the biggest carbon sink on the planet, which is the ocean, right? The ocean is sequestering carbon. And that carbon would make its way to the ocean, hit the Delaware Bay and the ocean.
Other thing I want to ask about, we actually have a dam in Clinton Township that we were considering removing. It's really not, the water's not really, it's not holding back any water, but we haven't been able to remove it because we didn't want to get all the equipment in there and tear up the environment. Is there any funding you can get for doing that kind of thing?
Yep. So that question was about a specific dam in Clinton and Clinton Township. I think I went and visited that dam.
I think, I've never been to it. I believe it's, tributary to the Beaverville.
Yep.
If I'm correct.
Yep, so that is, sometimes the cost of a dam removal is increased because a lack of access, right? So if you can't get those big machines in and out, and you have to clear a road to go, down to the dam, then you're introducing additional costs. but that dam is small enough that you don't have to get the big giant equipment in there. So you could do it with smaller, more manageable pieces of equipment, but you would definitely, have to, lose some trees in order to get down to that dam. Any other questions, either in the room or on Zoom?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for everyone who was here and everyone who's been watching online. Appreciate it. We did record the presentation. So at least the members and guests are able to have that afterwards. It won't be up immediately, but if you need to refer to it, it should be available presently. All right. And thank you so much for joining us. John,
We mentioned that there's spaces open on next.
I'm sorry, there's spaces.
There's spaces open on next time on the tenant.
Yes, okay. Right, as well. So I mentioned that there's some other upcoming programs. You can see those posted on our website. And we'll be having, we have regular meetings of a group of us that gets together to help plan not only these kinds of presentations, but also outdoor activities, et cetera. So if you have interest in specifics, please do feel free to join us. We'll post those online as well. So you're welcome to come to the meetings that are not the public presentations, but they're just called the XCOM, the committee meetings. All right, Brand, thank you all.